Thank you for being here today. As I've said, we're trying to offer you, the point of view of the FIA with, the FIA race director and FIA director, in order to explain exactly our point of view of what's happened last Sunday in Austin. Just a couple of information. As you know, Charlie will take the word. He will show you some video for the broadcaster. We will try to do our best in order to provide all the material we need. And we will accept a couple of questions, not so many. I will give the word because we have absolutely not much time today. Thank you very much. Charlie, please.
Hey, thank you, Matteo, and good afternoon to everybody. As you know, we're here to talk about the events of last weekend. I think everyone, I assume that everyone is familiar with the rule in question. Leaving the track, as you know, is not an offence in itself, but if a driver does so, he must rejoin the track safely and without gaining any lasting advantage. And I think those last two words are really important in this case because there are a number of occasions when drivers left the track during the race and during practice that weren't formally looked at by the stewards, purely because no lasting advantage was gained. And I think we can show you a few incidents here to try and demonstrate that. So first of all, I guess we should just have a quick look at the incident in question. This assumes that I know how to work this, of course. There we go. I think you've all probably seen it all before, but maybe we just refresh our memory here. So there's one view of it. Here's another. And finally, I think you've all seen these before anyway, of course, but I think this one is probably the most interesting, where you can see just how far off the track Max was. And I think the point here really is that the stewards felt that he had gained an advantage, he had shortened the track, clearly he was off the track, and he passed another driver at the same time. So I think for them the decision was quite simple technically, but I think emotionally it wasn't so easy because the decision had to be made quite quickly. So shall we just, I think you've all seen that, so I don't think you have anything much to say about that, or maybe you have later, but let's just go to a few other things that we've put together here for you to see. If I can just make this a bit bigger. I'm not very good at this, as you can tell. These are some incidents from qualifying. As you can see, that's Danny running wide. Most of the things we saw in Austin involved turn 19, as you know. But what I told all the teams and drivers prior to qualifying, because a lot of them asked me, what policy would we adopt there? And I said, unless it's obvious that a driver has gained an advantage, then we will not do anything. And I think that's a very clear way of looking at things, because we know drivers will go off the track from time to time, but it's not always an advantage to do so. And in fact, in very, very few occasions, it is actually faster on this particular corner. So what we did in Austin when we had an incident like that, we would go to a page we have here, real time in race control. And here you can see a list of all the sector times. If I just pause that for a second. For each driver, we can drag down any driver we want, and we can then look at all his sector times. And these sector times are the times taken to go between each of the light panels, what we call mini sectors. And you can go to a particular sector, particular lap time, look across, look at that mini sector time, and then decide whether you can see whether or not the driver gained an advantage. So we do that immediately after we see any of those sort of excursions off the track, particularly at turn 19. And we did that during qualifying, and we saw nothing that gave us any cause for concern. We can also do that during the race, of course, it goes without saying. And then we put together a few other examples of drivers going off the track during the race. This is Max, I believe. He was just a little bit wide at turn 9. Didn't give us any cause for concern, because he passed the Sauber after that, of course. What's this one now? This is Daniel and Valtteri. I'm not sure which one this is. This is probably, it's the one where Daniel goes too deep into the corner. And you can see that he makes a dive up the inside, runs too wide. We're not too concerned about that. He didn't gain any lasting advantage from doing that. In fact, he was probably slower through the corner. So we have to try and sort of take a sort of practical approach to this, and there is an element of wanting to let the drivers race as well. So it's only when it's absolutely clear that the stewards need to get involved. I'm just looking at maybe a few other cases here. I think this was Kimi and Daniel, where Daniel forces him a little bit wide here, I think, and Kimi goes off, but no harm done, of course, because he hasn't gained any advantage, let alone a lasting one. I think we maybe have a couple more. Well, I think we probably, I think you get the picture. There are quite a few instances of this happening during the race. So, all in all, I think the accusations of inconsistency are pretty much without foundation. I think the only time it was absolutely clear that a driver gained an advantage, the driver was duly penalised. And that's really where we are coming from, I believe. So I think I've summed up the sort of
Okay, now.
how we dealt with it during the whole event. So obviously, if you have any questions, I'll be more.
Okay, let's try to stay on the question. I will give the word. We're starting with the gentleman over there. Let me say that probably we will not produce any transcript about it, okay? Just to be clear. Please.
Charlie, I think we understand when it's a driver behind going off the track. But what about the instances when it's the driver in front and he fails to lose a position he might otherwise have done by going off the track? What's your position on that?
If a driver fails to lose a position he would otherwise have done, well, I think that would be gaining an advantage. But obviously we'd have to look at the actual incident and what leads up to it. But that's not something that I believe happened in Austin, no.
Gentleman behind him. Yeah, thanks.
Charlie, are the orange curbs, what you put in here, one of the consequences?
No, they were a consequence of last year. We've been planning those for the last 11 months, so they're completely unconnected with the events of last weekend.
Gentleman over there.
Max said earlier that Kimi pushed him off the limits. Is it something that you looked
He said that Kimi pushed him off
the track
and
closed the door?
I'm not aware of that. Did he elaborate on that? Did he say where? This is not something that was drawn to our attention, I'm afraid. No, but at the time, it wasn't something that was drawn to our attention. So, sorry, let me just be clear. What did Max say about Kimi?
He just said that Kimi moves slightly to the right, which you can.
Oh, I see. No,
And so therefore he tried to avoid it.
I see.
But then, of course, he can't present that to you because it's already a fait accompli.
No, sorry, I see what you mean, sorry. I understand the question now. It looked to me very much as if Kimi was moving, he'd taken slightly wide line in turn 16, which is the normal line, then you go tighter in 17, which is where, so he would naturally go further to the right to go closer to the apex of turn 17, which is where Max was trying to go. And there was a big gap, as you all saw, between Max and Kimi. So I don't think Kimi shut the door. It's taking the line that Max should have expected him to take. But I'm not really here to I don't really want to get into the actual nitty-gritty of that incident because that's been discussed and the decision's been made. I think what we're trying to do here is to illustrate the fact that we are attempting, with this system that we have here, where we can drag up incidents all the time to try and compare them, to try and reach as consistent decision-making as possible.
Well said, Charlie. It's always good to clarify this. Please, we stay on this side for the moment. So we go, if you can stay here, we're trying to pose all the questions. We start from the beginning here, and you stay close, and we're going down. So we try to accept more questions possible. Gentlemen here, you stay down.
Charlie, around the pit stop time, I think Mercedes were quite surprised how close Vettel was. And when you look at the race history chart, he does Sebastian goes in first, does his golden lap, then his second lap is actually another 0.3 quicker. And he went off at turn 19 then.
He did.
So was that considered?
We examined that with those mini sector times and we were happy.
The gentleman over there, yeah, with the glasses, yeah.
Charlie, a lot has been said about inconsistency. If that move would have been for P7, would you have done the same?
Of course. It goes without saying. I mean, wherever it happens in the field, of course, the same rules will apply.
Behind you.
Charlie, you're a very clever man, and most people watching Formula One are probably not as clever as you. Let's swap inconsistency for ambiguity, because people think that the current rules on track limits are totally ambiguous. They can't understand it. Why can't there be a hard and fast rule or gravel or AstroTurf or whatever put in so that we actually don't have to keep explaining this lasting advantage rule? Why are you so hell-bent on the lasting advantage when actually to try and make the sport a little simpler helps people enjoy it an awful lot more and gives them less reason to moan?
Well, first of all, I'm not hell-bent on this rule. It's just something that's been evolved through the normal process. We're just applying the rule. And the idea of using the word lasting, I think it's been in there 3 or 4 years, is to allow a driver to give a place back that he takes when he shouldn't have done, because he's gained an advantage, but we're only concerned if it's a lasting one. But that's really where it came from. But I agree with you. It would be far better if we could come up with something that a system, procedure, features on the circuit, which were it was absolutely unambiguous about whether it was faster or not. The way to do that is to use very big curbs, but of course they are unacceptable, really. We've gone away from gravel, as you know, for years now, which is what given rise to the curbs that we have now. Add to that the complexity for a track trying to cater for all types of cars and bikes and things like that. I mean, here they go to, no, not here, sorry, in COTA, they go to extraordinary lengths to make sure that the two can coexist. This is what leads to perhaps not the ideal curb for certain corners, but we're working very carefully and very systematically through the problem corners to try and make it absolutely crystal clear that if a driver goes off, it will not be quicker. Obviously, teams will try their very best to take advantage of whatever curb's there, and they will work hard to try and eke out that last 100th of a second if they possibly can, which gives rise to them exploring the limits more and more and more. And I mean, we saw in Austin, turn 6, on the apex of turn 6, cars never went so far to the right as they did this year. We're going to have to do something about that because we're always chasing our tails. But I think we do want, as you rightly say, we do want circuits where if a car goes off, we don't have to look to examine the sort of detail I was showing you just now to see if a driver did gain anything. It must be clear that he didn't. I mean, the sort of things that we together with the circuit here, put in place to avoid the sort of discussions we had after the race here last year. Hopefully it'll work. Those are the sorts of things that I feel we need to do, and then there will be no need for discussion. We're continually learning, though. Some corners, like turn 17 in Austin, we never thought would be exploited, but clearly it will. It was, so we need to do something about that. And I think we're gradually closing down those sort of holes, and I think we are anyway. We're reducing the number of corners that give rise to problems like that year on year. But I do want to make it simpler. I agree with you completely on that one.
Gentleman in front of you with the blue shirts.
Charlie, since we're talking about inconsistency, Max spoke to television after the race and said some pretty intemperate things about one of your officials, calling him an idiot and a Mongol, I believe. So given that Seb said some pretty rude things about you here last year, can you just tell us where we are with the Max's comments afterwards? Has he been to apologise? Are you seeking an apology? Will there be some measure against him?
I prefer not to comment on that at the moment. Seb, for his little outburst last year, he did apologise profusely, and I haven't heard any such apology just yet from Max, but it would be nice if he did.
The weekend is still long. Gentleman over there.
Talking about the monitoring system that you just showed, about an hour ago, both Sergio and Max said there was no communication to the drivers about, this sort of monitoring. Is that correct, or were the drivers actually in the know on how you are looking at these things?
The teams know it all. They have very similar software for themselves, and they know everything that we do. So whether they pass that detailed information on to their drivers, I don't know. I'm more than happy to show the drivers later if there's a call for it.
In front of him.
This was a pretty straightforward incident, but there might be other last lap incidents which are not so easy to judge. How will you go on in the future? Is it so important to have the right people on the podium, or wouldn't it be sometimes better to go into detail, to have witnesses or other data to, let's say, have a proper judgment?
I'm fairly sure that if the incident hadn't been as clear-cut as the stewards thought it was, they would have investigated it afterwards.
In front of him.
Charlie, when I go to watch my lad in sports car races or any club race at Brands Hatch through Paddock Hill Bend, they're absolutely ruthless on track limits, and that's Austin and that's Austria where we have problems. And the drivers just behave. They're told to control their cars. The barriers do the job for us in Monaco. The FIA have to do the job for us everywhere else. Why can't you be really tough on track limits? And whether it's a lasting advantage or not, go, if you run wide more than once, twice, 3 times, whatever it is, you are coming through the pits.
I've been asked this question a few times. My personal belief is that if you take what is a zero-tolerance approach, then you will be forever reporting drivers, because they will do it multiple times during the race. And you have to monitor every corner on every lap for every driver to a very high precision. And with the greatest respect to other formulae, I think we don't need that in Formula One. I think we would be confronted with various videos after a race that people have taken or acquired from somewhere, say, look, he didn't go off, he was just about still on the white line, and we would have all these discussions. There'd be a line outside the steward's office waiting to discuss whether or not they should have been penalised. And I don't think Formula One needs that. If that's what the strategy group and teams really want to, they want to develop rules to say that, then so be it. We will police it. But we don't have that rule at the moment. But I'm just giving you my personal view on that.
Here on the front row.
Charlie, there's real-world consistency and there's perceived inconsistency. And unfortunately, perception is reality until it's disproven. What can the FIA do to actually ensure that there aren't these perceptions out there? Because that really is a major issue at the moment. You've gone to great lengths to illustrate it all, but the fans don't realize this.
No, I agree with you that reality is not the same as perception. But I think what Crofty was saying just now, and I think the approach we need to take is to make sure that it's easy to explain to everybody. And if a driver goes off, we don't even need to have a second look at it. It's slower. And drivers hence won't go off as much. And I think that is the goal that was set in the strategy group last July, just before Hockenheim. And at that meeting, I identified all the circuits that we race on, 19 corners on which we had problems. Turn 17 in Austin wasn't one of them, by the way. And we've gradually worked our way with the circuits to develop curbs on all of those corners to try and contain things. I think the turn 19 in Austin it's not quite there. There are a couple of little tweaks we could do to that to make sure it's absolutely, definitely not faster. But I think if you look at all the circuits that we've been to this year, there have been fewer concerns about track limits. And I think we are getting there, but we still got a little way to go yet.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Charlie, I'm sorry I have to ask this, but it's as a result of Max pointing out one steward in particular that he believes has now got it in for him. Max has finished 8 races that steward's been on the panel, and in 5 of them he's been given a penalty. The only 5 races in which he's ever been given a penalty. Furthermore, sorry, I got some stats. Over the last 20 races, since Mexico last year, that steward has been on the panel 6 times, with an average of 4 points handed out over those 6 races. All other 16 races, the average is 2. The question is, in the first part, can you see how Max is upset and thinks that he's got one steward that's now got it in for him? Do you believe there is any justification for that? Or is it, as a result, as the statistics show, that this one steward has sat on a panel which is twice as likely to hand out points as others when we are supposedly in an era of allowing people to race?
That's a bit of a tricky one, really, isn't it? I think the statistics, I've seen those statistics, and I think they don't paint the correct picture. I think it's just coincidence that Gary happened to be there. You can't tie the two together. I know Gary very well, and a more honest and scrupulous person you couldn't ever come across. And I think any sort of idea that he may have it in for a driver is wholly unfounded. But we have a set of guidelines. I don't know if you've seen them, Will, but we have, this is for the stewards' guidelines, and they have all the offences, whether the offence occurs in free practice, qualifying or race, what the penalty should be. They are guidelines because, you know, leaving the track and gaining an advantage or causing a collision, there are degrees of doing that, of course. You can be a minor one or a major one, you know. But roughly speaking, the guidelines are there to help the stewards be consistent, and it will tell you exactly how many points should be awarded if you do this, a reprimand for that, no points, and so on. So we go to quite considerable lengths to make sure that the decisions are made consistently. And going back to Dieter's point, of course, there is this difference between reality and the perceived reality. But I really don't think there's anything in that at all, Will.
Just a quick question about the process, Charlie. Did someone on the Ferrari pit wall key through to you and say, we don't think that's on?
No.
So did you refer it to the stewards?
Well, the stewards actually referred it to me because we were doing other things as the race had just finished. And the steward said, did you see that? And I said, no, what? Oh, I just saw that Max had passed. And then, obviously, because they are fully within their rights to refer things to us to check, and then it will go back to them. So we looked at the footage then, and then I agreed that it needed to be investigated.
Okay, so it came from them rather than you.
Yes, but that is not uncommon.
Yeah, again,
Is it a majority decision by the stewards? So, and what happens if it is 2-2? And how was it in Austin?
It was 4-0. It was unanimous. There were 4 stewards, and they.
Is it a majority?
It can be done via a majority, yes.
Yeah, you know the process,
It's
Mike.
it's quite rare.
Gentleman over there, he was asking. Yeah.
Charlie, one of the solutions we have for all these things is to have 3 professional stewards. FIA does not consider this possibility. They would create their own criteria for special situations like that or others, like we call in the right is jurisprudencia. The FIA does not consider it. Would be even more professional.
I don't think there's any real need to do that because the stewards, after every race, they write a report. Everyone sees it. All the rationales explained for all the decisions. We have meetings 4 times a year in order to make sure that everyone understands exactly why decisions were made. And it's all documented very carefully in order to make sure that, as I say, everyone is right up to date with everything. The idea of having one set of stewards for the whole year has been just discussed many, many times. I think it would bring with it different problems, and I really am not convinced that it would be definitely the right way to go. Sorry? I prefer not to say at the moment, actually. I thought we're here to discuss track limits rather than...
Exactly. Well said, Charlie. Grazie.
quality of the stewards.
Remember that, allow me to say so, you have Laurent Mekies over there. We are trying to do, since a couple of years, not even more, a certain process for the stewards. We've had, a moment, especially last year, this year, to be honest, in January, where we had a proper workshop and we are confronting, all the opinions. So we're discussing, we're taking care. What Charlie was saying is absolutely true. It's not something that I can imagine in television can be seen, commented, and you can make opinion. There is a proper, process, and we are always super open in showing you, as few of you had the opportunity to see what is going to happen from the stewarding and taking the decision point of view. We go back to the gentleman over there. Thank you for me saying so.
So it's just something that's come up given what you just said, Matteo. Max went across the line, and we all know that that is a no-no. He did it for a fraction of a second and gained, well, on the splits. But I can't imagine it was anywhere near 0.3 seconds that you've said Seb gained by running wide, but yet that was permissible.
I'm sorry?
You said Seb gained 0.3 seconds on one of his laps earlier in the race in response to Tony's question. That Seb on one of his laps
Tony's question was about Seb setting his fastest lap on the lap after his first lap out.
Bingo, by running
we
wide.
examined the mini-sector times and we were happy, that's what I said.
Yeah, you said you were happy.
I didn't mention 0.3 of a second.
Oh, you said 0.3.
The lap time was 0.3 quicker.
Okay.
Big difference.
So you can see where we're struggling with this, that if you can have a lap time overall where you gain 0.3 and you've run wide on that one, Max, whatever his lap time was at the end, one can't imagine that was 0.3 seconds quicker than his other lap.
Will, listen, he was 0.3 quicker over the lap. He was not quicker in the mini sector where he went off the track. That's all we were concerned with. What he does on the rest of the lap is his business. So he was 0.3 seconds quicker. It wasn't by virtue of going off the track at turn 19, though. And that's the only thing that would concern us.
Cool.
There was a question here on the front row.
Talking about track limits, I made a question in the first session, in the first conference, and it seems that the drivers want more grass, more gravel, less curves, no bananas, no those things. They want mistakes to pay the price, the guys who make mistakes to pay the price, and they're not fans of the runoffs, of the paved runoffs and so on. So what are you doing just to sort of accommodate these things so they really don't want people running all over the place? I mean, they don't want to take advantage because they know that they're going to do it. So what are you doing? Are you taking their views in consideration?
Of course, we always take their views into consideration, but they have to think why we've ended up where we are. Asphalt runoff areas are safer, first of all. The unfortunate byproduct of asphalt runoff areas and curbs which have to be arranged in order to allow motorcycles to run on the same tracks make them too inviting for cars. And that's what we've got to try and do, is to try and make sure that going off the track does penalise the driver. We've had a range of discussions with the drivers about this. We've talked about grass, we've talked about gravel. Well, one could envisage a system like in Jerez, for example. They have 1 metre wide curb, a bit of concrete, and then they have gravel. And the F2 race there a couple of weeks ago, there were no problems with track limits. They just knew they couldn't go off there. But it's very hard to maintain, and the runoff areas need to be bigger if you've got gravel. Asphalt slows cars down almost twice as quickly as gravel does. So that was the reason why we went to asphalt, because it was better. I think there must be a way, and we've got to try and come up with a way. It needn't apply to all corners, because only a few are a problem. But there are ways, and we proved that, because we've worked on it this year to try and reduce the number of corners that give rise to problems.
Before giving the word to the last two questions, allow me to say another thing, that since a couple of races, we started to, in the name of transparency, to broadcast with the help of Formula One, the driver's briefing. It's not a matter of the show. I mean, if you see it, you can see that there is a certain dynamic. So we have the FIAs that is sitting down and listening to the drivers and explaining everything to them. So this is something that you can probably focus a little bit of attention, because sometimes you can even see how the process goes. We go quickly at the front row.
Charlie, Ross Brawn made some comments about the incident and started talking about electronics, etc., etc. Has any progress been made in this regard? I know this is slam dunk, so there's no question he was over, but has any progress been made by the FIA in terms of electronic monitoring?
Yeah, for the last 18 months, we've had a project running to try and assist with establishing whether track limits have been exceeded. It's still going on. It's not straightforward, but we are looking at ways of trying to do it more efficiently that don't need to have an observer there to say he went over or he didn't. But getting the required degree of accuracy that would be necessary in Formula One is not going to be easy. No, I don't. Where's Laurent? He's in charge of it. Any idea on time frames there, Laurent?
Can you give me the mic quickly, please? Yep, thanks.
We are running it quite now in testing in full scale, so with closed cars. So it's in the testing phase. We anticipate it will take another 6 to 9 months before, as Charlie said, reaching a point where the precisions will be good enough. To be honest, it's a system we are developing mainly for closed cars, because as Charlie explained, for single-seaters, we are hoping that we will get the circuits to enforce the track limits, which will be a preferred solution for everybody. Nevertheless, we have this project within for the closed car, and perhaps if it's performing very well, maybe we will look at it for single-seaters if we need to, but that's not our preferred route.
Good. Huh? Okay, quickly, because we need to leave the room. We have another press conference, as you do know. Whatever.
Just to clarify, Charlie, was the last mini sector of Max Verstappen on the last lap quicker than the lap before? And should we consider that Max had the position just before he cut the turn, as he had some significant portion of the car in front of the Kimi's rear tire?
The mini sectors were not relevant in this case, because he cut the corner and passed another car by doing so. And I think if you look at the video carefully, he had a portion of his car alongside in turn 16, but Kimi then obviously moved to take the line, which was his right, and Max decided that he would not back off, but he would continue, but cut the corner. So that's what the stewards, I believe, decided was the tipping point.
Last one with the gentleman stand.
Charlie, to go back on an earlier question about the track limits and the risk, I mean, a lot of the drivers up here were just talking about, the gravel damages the car in a way. It does put a considerable risk in the race itself as opposed to just running off on to the grass and whatnot. I know the struggle is hard for you in finding that balance of safety and saying, okay, well, if this driver goes off track limits, it can really affect his race. Have you looked into other systems, other ways of trying to slow the car down, maybe through a system through the FIA that they can just sort of make the car slow down on its own? I mean, I know that might be a little far ahead, but have you thought about things like that?
We have. I mean, it could easily be done, well, relatively. I mean, we have loops that we use, for example, in Spa. We can see when a car goes off at the top of Eau Rouge. It would be, I believe, by Formula One standards at least, quite a straightforward thing to a signal goes to the car which reduces power for 5 seconds, say. I mean, those are the sorts of things that we're thinking of, but there's not much appetite for that among the teams.
Grazie, Charlie. Not so easy, but as usual, you know that he used to do that. So I will let you know about the further steps from a technical point of view for the footage and everything. Thank you very much for your attention.